Well, hello, welcome back. This is Leviticus chapter 12, and I hope you're enjoying it. I hope you're learning. I hope if you have questions, you ask them of somebody, if not me, somebody. I don't want you to be lost. I don't want you to feel guilty. And most importantly, I don't want you to think that you need to know all of this stuff and understand it and practice it. The point of especially chapter 12 is showing us a pattern, and God shows us spiritual patterns, and that way when we see it later on we recognize it, we understand what's happening. And so if you've read chapter 12, you probably know that it doesn't seem to have a whole lot to do with salvation or Jesus. But when we get to Jesus's crucifixion and the Roman soldier puts his spear in there and water and blood come out, that's significant. We're going to learn about the blood and water atonement and purification and why all that stuff matters. That's a pattern that we're setting up. So don't get too caught up on the details as much as the pattern of what it's foreshadowing that's coming. That part we already know, so it should be fairly easy to recognize. So we're in Leviticus chapter 12, so let's get going. I'm going to read from the New Living Translation because there's not a lot of difference in the two. So, other than they replace God with Lord, but we'll get past that. The Lord said to Moses, "Give the following instructions to the people of Israel. If a woman becomes pregnant and gives birth to a son, she will be ceremonially unclean for 7 days, just as she is unclean during her menstrual period. On the eighth day, the boy's foreskin must be circumcised. After waiting 33 days, she will be purified from the bleeding of childbirth. During the time of purification, she must not touch anything that is set apart as holy, and she must not enter the sanctuary until her time of purification is over. If a woman gives birth to a daughter, she will be ceremonially unclean for 2 weeks, just as she is unclean during her menstrual period. After waiting 66 days, she will be purified from the bleeding of childbirth. When the time of purification is completed for either a son or a daughter, the woman must bring a 1 year old lamb for a burnt offering and a young pigeon or turtle dove for a purification offering. She must bring her offerings to the priest at the entrance of the tabernacle. The priest will then present them to the Lord to purify her. Then she will be ceremonially clean again after her bleeding at childbirth. These are the instructions for a woman after the birth of a son or a daughter. If a woman cannot afford to bring a lamb, she must bring 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons. One will be for the burnt offering and the other for the purification offering. The priest will sacrifice them to purify her, and she will be ceremonially clean. Makes sense, right? Or you're thinking, hey, why are we reading about this in the Bible? I don't understand. Again, it's patterns that we're trying to notice here. God's teaching us based on what we know and what we understand in the Hebrews and what they know and understand. So he's bringing us along. And the third book of the Bible is the beginning of those patterns. That's why we want to learn it so we recognize those kind of things. So chapter 12 mainly deals with the ritual status of a new mother and a child. So the mother becomes ritually impure, unclean, not sinful, not bad, just not ritually clean. A male child's mother impurity lasts for 40 days, a girl is 80 days. No reasons given for the difference. And sometimes we try to figure this out. Well, what's different about a girl birth or a boy birth? God has his reasoning, and he doesn't take the time sometimes to explain that to us. Other times he might, but some things he just says. And if you've ever been a kid or had a kid, you know at some point you have to say, because I said so. And you just got to take it and go with it. And since it's God, we know it's right. So why would we dispute it? Let's just move on. So periods of ritual impurity are divided into 2 stages. The first stage, 7 days for boys, 14 for girls. With the second stage comes a slightly less impure status for 33 days for a boy or 66 for a girl. Now, the first stage, she can't have marital relations, and anything she has set on or laid on becomes impure. In verse 3, we get the law that it was on the eighth day that a male child was to be circumcised. because the eighth day was the first day of the second stage. That's why the eighth day is picked. It's a lesser impurity. So during the second stage, sex can resume. She cannot enter holy grounds nor touch anything holy. If the new mother was a priest wife, she couldn't eat the priest portion taken from the sacrifice. That didn't mean that she starved. It just meant that particular portion from that sacrifice she couldn't eat. She had to eat other things. So she just ate regular food. So after the 40 or 80-day period, the new mother was required to bring two types of sacrifices to regain her purity: the Olah and the Hadadat. We studied those in previous chapters, a burnt offering and a purification offering. So this is not about sin. This is about ritual purity. This is part of the reason that the Hadadat is a purification offering rather than a sin offering. Words matter because there's nothing sinful about having a kid. Uh, Uncleanliness, ritual impurity, doesn't necessarily involve sin, especially in this. And that's why God's given us this example of something that doesn't involve sin, but does involve ritual impurity, uncleanliness. So the God principle is that unclean things cannot be declared holy. An unclean thing must first become clean before it can be declared holy. Unclean is not a state that a believer in Yeshua faces. You and I, if we believe in Christ, this isn't a state that we face. As a result of our trust in Christ, we remain holy and clean. So our sin nature will eventually produce uncleanliness, and that's why we rely on Jesus's atoning work. But before Christ, it was the Olah that was designed to atone for the Israelites' sinful and unclean nature. The stages of becoming holy work the same today. First, we begin life clean. Our sin nature takes us to an unclean state of behavior, and we must come out of that into a clean state. And we use the water, the living water that is Yeshua, to make us clean again. So in 2 Corinthians 6:17, it says, "Wherefore come out from among them, and be ye separate, saith the Lord, and touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you." And I chose the King James Version because sometimes I get accused of using the Jewish part of it. And that's the King James Version says, "Touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you." So once we are cleansed by Yeshua, then we can be made holy and acceptable to God by his blood. So the living water cleans us, the blood atones for us, and makes us holy and acceptable to God. The spiritual principle for the process is taught in chapter 12, and how one can go from unclean to holy is broken down so we can understand it, which is the purpose of Torah, is to allow us to see and understand spiritual principles. Once we are cleansed, then we're holy and acceptable. So water is the purifying agent, while blood is the atoning agent. That's why, like I said, we see the Roman soldier poke Jesus' side, and water and blood comes out, because Jesus called himself living water, and living water was needed to purify, and blood was needed to atone. That's why he says that. So this little statement in the New Testament had great meaning to the people watching, because they understand the necessity of water and blood. That's why we study the Torah, because then we understand why that matters so much. And Yeshua, Jesus the Christ, was both for us. So that's chapter 12. It really means more when you understand what blood and water mean and why. So God bless. I hope you enjoyed it. Share this with a friend. And don't forget, love God, love people, and change the world.